And hello everyone, welcome back to another Bootstrap tutorial. So in this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to work with buttons in Bootstrap. We already know a little bit about buttons. For example, by adding the btn close tag to a button, it will transform it into an X or a close button. Cool, I'm just going to remove this alert, which we talked about in a previous tutorial. And now we just have the button. And we can just clear up the class and remove the attribute there. And we can just say, click me. So this is a normal HTML button. I'm just going to maybe go im-2. Okay, I will just give it a margin if you maybe missed that tutorial. So now we just have a little bit of a margin. Okay. So this is just a normal HTML button. It's pretty gross and I've never really liked how this look. Now with Bootstrap, you already have an inbuilt class for buttons. By just saying btn, you already create a button. Now of course this button doesn't look very good because it's invisible, but it's a basic button. To add more styling to a button, you can of course go btn and in all of the colors we have covered so many times in the past. For example, primary, and now it will be a nice bluish color. Or info, now it will be also bluish but lighter blue. Dark for a dark themed one. Light for a light themed one. And of course you have link if you have a linked button. It's still a button, but it looks like a link. Now, if you remember my HTML tutorial, you can also use buttons in multiple ways, and this applies to Bootstrap as well. For example, if we have an input that is of type submit, and this is a button, it's a submit button, you can add this right here, that class. You can add that. We don't need to add this margin though. And let's go here, instead of link, we say success. And now you have a success button, even though it's an input. Same with links, because they can also be seen as buttons. So if we go here and create a link, we can say class, and let's just add some default text here. And if we add a button class to it, such as btn danger, then now we have a red button, even though this is actually an A tag. Nice. Now, I usually don't use this as much, these buttons that are as filled. Usually I prefer to have my buttons outlined, and usually I would add that styling myself, but Bootstrap has this styling built in, so it comes out of the box. By going here and instead of saying button warning or button and whichever color, you in the middle add outline, and this will add an outline instead of the button fully making it that color. So now if we go primary, we now have a bluish button. If you hover over it, it fades into the full button color, and I love that so much. Now you could put any color here yet again, you are not limited to any of that, and I love doing this a lot. You can also give buttons specific sizes. For example, this is the medium size, it's the default. You can also make it larger by going btn and then LG, and this will make the button extra large. As you can see there, it's sized up a bit. It would be easier to see if we remove the outline though, so let's just go like that. As you can see, it's nice and big. If I remove this, it's nice and small, but it can also go smaller. So if we go here and say instead of LG, we say SM, then it's even smaller. So if you really want small buttons, then you can accomplish that with these few commands. So just btn LG and then btn SM to make them a specific size. Sometimes you also want your buttons to take up the entire width. You can do that by going here and creating another element with the class the grid, and then moving the button in there, and this will make the parent basically full, and it will make the button be full as well. You can also add btn block, And this will make sure that the button is always this full width by making it in a blocked scope. Now sometimes you will have multiple buttons, like this, where they all say click me. You can then go and give it a gap. For example, gap 1, gap 2. And the higher you go, of course, the larger the gap between the buttons would be. And that's very nice. Cool. So that's if you want to make buttons be the full width that it can be, by just adding the grid to its parent element and into the button the btn block, which is optional, but usually you'd use that as well. Okay. Sometimes you don't want a button to be clicked, and usually to accomplish this you just go disabled, and this will disable the button. However, what if you wanted to do this with an A tag? You wanted to disable, in a sense, the link. So here we go here and we say class is equal to btn primary. And of course we say link. Now how would you disable this? Because if I were to try and type disabled here, it's not even going to autocomplete for me because you can't disable a link. Instead, you can add a class to make it look disabled by saying disabled. And now it will look disabled as well. But take note, it's still clickable. It just applied styling. So you should take note of that. It just kind of shows it that it's disabled. Now this applies to normal buttons as well. If you didn't add this disabled here, you could also say disabled. And it will still look disabled, but it won't actually be disabled when you click it. Then you also have your active, and this just means make it look active. So I believe if you didn't add disabled here, that will still look disabled. So active will make it look active, and disabled will make it look disabled. And this of course isn't limited to just the button. It can be used on multiple different elements like we saw with the A tag. And it also, sometimes you want to kind of make your button be a little bit of a loader, because sometimes you're fetching data from the database or something like that, and your button isn't quite clickable yet, but you want to make it obvious by making it a loader and displaying a loader inside. Well, we can do that. I'm just going to remove these classes, and in here inside of the button we can add a new element called span. And we can give it a class of spinner border. And this will give it a spinner, so it will look like a loader. And you can of course make it smaller by going spinner border, and I'm just going to copy that, spaced SM, and that will make it a bit smaller. So if that loading is a bit too big, you can use that to make it smaller. And you probably have algae as well to make it extra big, or I don't think so, no, doesn't look like it. Yeah, so you can use SM to make it smaller. And you can of course still add some text, for example, loading, ... and now we'll say loading next to that loader. Although that looks very weird, so let's make it smaller again, -SM. And that looks normal. Otherwise you'll have to increase the text size to make it look more normal. And this also works on disabled buttons. So if we were to add a class disabled here, or to make it disabled fully, so disabled, then it will still work. And of course you can change this loader to be something other or else than a spinner by going spinner grow. And this will make it a growing spinner. And there's of course more, but these two ones we'll be talking about most. And this one is also very big, so you can do the same and just say SM, and now it will be a bit smaller. Which spinner you use doesn't actually ever matter, it's up to your preference. Nice. Now sometimes you have multiple buttons, but you want to group them together so they almost look like one button, but they're just buttons that aren't spaced out. For example, let's go here and say, this one can say Android, and this one can say iOS, and this can say Kai OS, which are all valid operating systems for mobile devices. Now by default, there are 3 separate buttons, which looks good, but they can also be seen as a category, so it would be nice if we could group them together and make them almost look like one big button. To do that, we can create a div with the class name btn group, and this will group the buttons together. So now if we go like this, and of course we remove this margin, otherwise it's going to apply margin to all of them. And we can actually add a margin here, so M2 or M2. There we go. So now it looks like one button, and without this div, it will of course look like this, so it will still be split. So that looks almost like one button, but it isn't. There are 3 different buttons. It's just a nice way to make them look. If you were to add another button, it will just be appended onto them, so you can add as many as you want. If you were to only have 2 buttons, then it will still work perfectly fine. So this is a very nice way to group your buttons. It highly depends on the situation as to where you'd want to group them, but usually it's more dependent on styling. Do you think it looks good or bad? And just like with everything, you can make it bigger or smaller by just going like this, pasting, and then going -LG. That will make it bigger, and by going -SM, that will make it smaller. Yet again, up to personal preference. It is also sometimes seen that you want to stack them vertically instead of horizontally, because this is horizontal. Sometimes you want to stack them from up to down instead from left to right. Well, you can by just adding vertical. And forgive me, I can't spell vertical. There we go. And now they're stacked on top of each other instead of next to each other. You're of course not limited to just one. You can have multiple. And they don't need to all be vertical, they can also be horizontal. You're not limited at all. And yeah, that's the basics of Bootstrap and buttons. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next Bootstrap tutorial.